Hey, what's up guys, this is Dark Souls 2 PvP gameplay, and it's everything we know so far. So what you'll see in this video are some of the best Dark Souls 2 PvP clips that I could find, and all of them are courtesy of Peverson, who's actually one of my favourite streamers over on Twitch TV. And I know it's going to be hard guys, but hopefully you can focus on what I'm saying with these awesome clips going on in the background. And I say that, but even right now I'm getting distracted by the fact that he's dual wielding a fucking great axe and a great sword. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that later. So if you were really lucky a couple of months ago, you might have had the chance to play some Dark Souls 2, and this video is an aggregation of most of the knowledge that came out of that test, and there's a bunch of really interesting stuff. But it is worth mentioning that the developer wanted this to be a network stress test, not a beta meant for balancing the game or anything like that. So don't get me wrong, I believe this footage gives us an insight into the final product, but bear in mind that a lot is subject to change. So without further ado, let's get into the good stuff. First off, a lot of stats have changed, and a few new ones have been added. So what did these mean for PvP? The most interesting new stat that's been added is agility. The description states that agility is an attribute governing swiftness of movement. It says that it boosts speed of evasion, blocking, and other actions. Every time I've played Dark Souls 2, this has been my favorite attribute to upgrade. Without it, your character will feel much more sluggish. It's unknown exactly how much you should have before your character starts to feel tight to control like it would in the first game, but it's definitely important to throw a few points into this attribute, and I'm just going out there and saying that you definitely need a few points in this attribute to be able to play the game well. It's worth noting that we're not entirely sure whether it's agility or soul level that changes the way your character feels. With agility, you definitely raise your shield faster, and it can improve the speed of your roll and maybe even the distance of your roll. It seems to increase the speed of most actions, including drinking Estus and using items. But the thing is that I'm not 100% sure of everything it affects right now. There's a lot of little things I'm gonna say, like it improves the turning circle on your character, it might affect run speed, it might affect the speed of your parry, invincibility frames. These are things that we really have to test and figure out for certain when we get our hands on a final game. Just know that if Dark Souls 2 PvP is going to be anything like Dark Souls PvP, then agility is going to be a big deal, because in Dark Souls PvP, movement was always king. Light roll characters were pretty much essential in PvP in the first game, and while heavy characters seem to be more viable in Dark Souls 2, I reckon having better movement will always be a core component of PvP in a Souls game. Anyway, going down the stat list, we see a division of some stats and minor additions to others. Vitality has been renamed to Vigor, an attribute that determines your HP. Vitality is now an attribute that determines your maximum equipment load you can hold, which used to be a part of Endurance. Now, Endurance only determines your overall stamina. So what we're seeing here basically is a division of stats that allows more fine-tuning of the characters you have. Honestly, I feel like increasing equipment load might be a little bit too weak as a stat, especially when you consider something like agility, which improves the speed of your rolls as well, but I'm sure these stats will be really important in some builds. Moving on, let's talk about resistance, your favorite stat in the first game. Resistance now governs defense in way more areas than before. It allows you to block with greater efficiency, and it also means that you have a reduced chance of being guard broken. And in Dark Souls 2, being guard broken is a much bigger deal, and I'll get into that in a moment, but someone in the beta actually pumped resistance really high, and they noticed that arrows and projectiles were doing literally no damage. Also, small dagger attacks had their damage reduced. It was almost as if it increased some sort of threshold where damage actually affects you. Resistance actually sounds amazing this time around. It seems like it boosts the effectiveness of your armor as well, so much so that you can just shrug off small attacks like they're nothing. Strength and dexterity have experienced changes, with strength weapons having a greater emphasis on breaking guards, and dexterity weapons boosting poison and bleed effects. So think about this for a second. It means that strength and dexterity don't just increase the damage of a weapon anymore, instead they boost the effectiveness of a strength or dexterity playstyle. And I'll try to explain what I mean by this. When you use strength weapons, breaking people's guards will be an important thing, because when you get hit while blocking, you'll lose stamina, lose all of your stamina, and you get guard broken. That's what it's like in Dark Souls. Now when you get guard broken in Dark Souls 2, you go into a repostable animation. So you have your guard broken, and you'll go into an animation where they do a huge amount of damage, similar to a parry riposte or a backstab. This is awesome. It means that strength build characters now have a way to play according to these new mechanics. If you have a huge weapon, you'll be trying to crush your opponent's guard, so your enemy goes into the animation you're seeing on the screen right now. The more strength you have, the more easily you'll do that, and the more resistance you have, the more effective their blocking will be. I can't wait to see how competitive play looks with these mechanics. On the flip side, it looks like dexterity users will have more emphasis on bleed and poison effects. So in Dark Souls you got bled out if you got hit with a weapon too many times in quick succession, losing a huge percentage of health if this occurs. Bleed effects go through shields. So now strength and dexterity playstyles have a way to get around people who hide behind their shields. Both playstyles seem really viable too. You'll see in the footage how strength weapons seem to have faster swings and more knockback effects this time around, and how dexterity weapons are brilliant when dual wielded and brilliant when they're used appropriately. I assume there'll be more dexterity weapons that have bleed effects, or maybe some that have poison effects, maybe even upgrade paths that allow these effects to come into play. So one thing you might have picked up from what I'm saying about Dark Souls 2, it just feels like every playstyle is going to be viable. And I'm going to talk about casters now. So casters are looking to be way better in PvP since they have a huge variety of spells this time around, but that's not all. So they have more AoE attacks, and they have more attacks that can be used more effectively in melee, but in addition to this, the attunement stat now increases the speed of casting in addition to the amount of slots you have, meaning it will be much harder to dodge spells in Dark Souls 2. Intelligence and faith stats remain more or less the same, except now they boost certain types of damage and defense. Intelligence boosts magic and fire attack and defense, meaning there's been a merging of pyromancy into the spellcaster's arsenal. Faith boosts lightning and dark attacks and defense. Whether this applies to the damage of melee weapons remains to be seen, but I'd say it's likely. Perhaps fire and lightning weapons will now scale with faith and intelligence like occult or enchanted weapons did previously. Overall, these stats sound like really good additions to the game. Once the game comes out though, we can see how the PvP landscape changes because of them, but I think it's shaping up really nicely so far. So in the beta, people did what people do, and they jumped to conclusions, and one of those conclusions was that stun locking would be a huge issue, and I think it's way too early to say that at this stage, and that's not just because the game is in beta, but also because there were many mechanics that we might not have had time to get our head around yet. Now, poise still exists in the game, but the armor sets we were given didn't really stop us getting stun locked at all, be it from small fast weapons or larger slow weapons. Now, I just don't think this will be a problem. It would be a glaring oversight for From to miss this, so there will be mechanics in place that stop you getting stun locked. Peveson has a few ideas in his video, which you should watch after this by the way, namely that boosting agility might allow you to raise your shield between weapon swings and stop the stun lock, and that also poise will help you deal with the stun locks from smaller, faster weapons. Now this makes a lot of sense, and it would be a really balanced way for the developers to deal with it. You know, small weapons get stopped by high poise, and slow, strong weapons get stopped by raising your shield in the middle of a swing. And he even demonstrates his shield being raised between Zweihander swings here, effectively stopping the stun lock from taking place. He also notes that there might be diminished damage on successive hits, so diminished returns. At this point in his video, Peeve talks about how distance from the weapon might actually affect damage, meaning movement would be way more important than ever, and the skill cap for PvP would be really high if this was a major factor. And here we see shield bashes actually doing damage, and not only that, but I've seen clips of people riposting with a shield, which makes me think that shields could be an effective weapon in your main hand, which would be really interesting. The lag in the beta wasn't bad at all. I had no trouble connecting to people, and my interaction with others was honestly better than in Dark Souls. It seems like the hosted servers are definitely doing their job compared to the peer-to-peer connections we had before in Dark Souls. The kick has been replaced by a sort of backhand move where you run forward a few steps, then smack your opponent. I haven't found much footage of this taking place, but apparently it's a really great way of breaking someone's guard, and once again we see game design being built around stopping people from hiding behind their shields, which is awesome. The next thing is parrying and backstabs, and backstabs especially, you remember, were a big deal in PvP in the first game. Backstabbing is preceded in Dark Souls 2 by a smack to their back with your hand before performing the backstab. They seem a little bit more difficult to pull off because it's actually harder to get behind your opponent with the new movement system, and it also seems like you can roll through the initialization of a backstab so that you won't be affected by it. In various clips you see someone initiating the backstab but failing to pull it off. You can also take damage while backstabbing someone, meaning backstabs are a less viable way of dealing with two enemies at once. The parry system has changed too. There's now a delay before the parry animation takes place, and enemies who have been parried fall flat on their back before being riposted. Parrying shouldn't have a huge change in PvP because you still have to account for lag a little bit, and PvP demonstrates how you can parry someone if someone's mashing the R1 button. Just like in Dark Souls 1, if someone's mashing R1 you can parry in between their swings and you'll actually be able to pull off a parry, stopping their spam. And I've got one more topic for you guys. After you listen to this, you'll be pretty much set for everything Dark Souls 2 in terms of PvP. Invading and summoning. What's changed? The biggest change in my opinion is that now you can be invaded while undead, and now I know some people will say, "Oh Vaati, I don't want to deal with being invaded, even though it's a core component of a Souls game, but I still want to summon people to help me." And to those people you have to say, get good. Because at least it means PvP will be way more active in Dark Souls 2. Remember all those invasion failed messages you got in the first game? Finally we can invade the players who don't want to be invaded, and that's glorious. Some people will complain about this, and I am being a bit too harsh, but I don't really think you should complain. Being invaded is a part of the game, and you can't really complain if it's balanced. If PvP isn't balanced, then you have the grounds to complain, but From has said that there will be ways to defend yourself from being invaded, so hopefully there is something for the people that complain. And if there isn't, just play offline, and you'll still get a good Dark Souls experience. Speaking of ways to defend yourself from being invaded, covenants. There are a few new PvP covenants, and one of them is called the Way of Blue, where you are literally tasked with defending people from invaders. Wear a covenant ring and you'll be summoned into people's worlds to defend them from red phantoms, or maybe you'll have people drawn into yours to defend you when you're invaded by a red phantom. And the red phantom covenant is called the Brotherhood of Blood, and they act similar to how Dark Wraiths did in the previous game. Players can also summon white phantoms just like in Dark Souls 1, but now there is the addition of a white phantom timer, where white phantoms can only stay in a world for a limited amount of time before being kicked out, and I assume this is an attempt to stop people steamrolling the game and defeating all the bosses with summoned help, because, you beat a few bosses with summoned help and all of a sudden you're too far in the game, and it does take away from the experience a little, knowing that you can have this easy way out if you're having trouble with the game. So the final question with all this is, how well is it balanced, with invaders and summoned help having timers? And honestly I think it's too early to say, but you should try to decide on your own based on this information. Invaders invade with 75% health. They can use Estus now, but for invaders, Estus regenerates their health really slowly, almost like a life gem. This is unless you're summoned with a red summoned soapstone for a duel type thing where you're on completely even footing. So if you think invaders feel a bit underpowered from what I said earlier, really you just have to use the enemies to your advantage and also take into the account that the person you're invading also has reduced health. Also, now your summoned help has a time limit, meaning they will have to chase down an invader in order to be of any real help during their time slot, so you can't just wait for the invader to come to you. Honestly, it's just hard to know how this will all be balanced until we actually play it, but those are the facts right there, make of them what you will. And that's me done for the day, guys. I think I covered everything. If you liked the footage from this video, then please check out Peeve's video. It was really nice of him to give it to me to use. But overall, thanks for watching, feel free to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Later. Hey everyone, and welcome to a new series where I challenge your knowledge of Dark Souls 2. If you've been subscribed to my channel for a while, then you should already know some of these awesome changes to the game, or maybe you'll at least learn some new ones. As usual, let's play the game with the like and the dislike button. If you learned something new in this video, leave a like. If you get 5 out of 5 and know everything, well done, and feel free to...